I note a lot of people sitting at the back. Why don't you come in front? It's all right. Very good afternoon. Thank you, the fellow academicians. I still consider myself an academic, though I'm a practitioner. So pleased to be here in the premises of Monash University Malaysia. And I'm glad to be sharing a session with you. I only have 20 minutes, so I shall try to be. But when I listened to Dan, I thought maybe I should be given a different topic. If you really want to have an Asian perspective, but we have now a clash of, well, I hate to use that word, civilizations, as to whether the Anglo-American view or Islamic or Neo-Confucian or Hindu. I'm thinking of a talk I gave years ago on Ahasushtra, Kautia, in BC 2300, where the first corporate governance code was promulgated in Asia. Those are fascinating subsets of not so much law, but history and anthropological works, which gives a contrary view of what the dominant Anglo-American view. However, today I will deliver a very Anglo-American Eurocentric view, so I will disappoint Dan in his remit. It will be another talk where we can discuss these views, but those views are not unimportant, because if you look at the latest Security Commission Malaysia, some of their exposure drafts of discussion is peppered with reference to the Sharia and the Islamic domain, which we know share with the Abrahamic religions, part of this whole contestation that we see that has been exaggerated or also distorted by the MAGA Americans, which I shall, let's say, the better. As for Dan, I shall make him uncomfortable. SMU and NUS, they sit very strongly on the Anglo-American view. So I would be very pleased to know his personal views as he struggled over the West and the East and whether the twain shall meet. But today I shall start with a quote which is very Western. Iris Murdoch wrote, "We were wise indeed could we discuss truly the signs of our times. Let us, instead of gazing wildly into the obscure distance, look calmly around us for a little while on the perplexed scene where we stand. Perhaps on a more serious inspection, something of our perplexity may disappear." When I commenced my studies, and I will betray my vintage, in the 70s, we had only two major company law textbooks, and one of them is Mr. Gower's book, LCB Gower. And by the way, for many of us who do not know, our 1965 Companies Act was actually Mr. LCB Gower coming to Malaysia to help the then Registrar of Company to draft that act. I was privileged 50 years later to be involved in a corporate law reform which gave birth to our 2016 Act. Very Anglo-American or Anglo-Saxon, if you like that phrase, whereby the common law ideas are perpetuated, although Gower did look at Australia and imported interesting sections from Australian jurisdiction. As a practitioner in the large city, the role of corporate law for me, when I experienced it after the halcyon days of lecturing in the cocoon of academic life on campus, I was exposed to the contestation out there of all business entities. The limited liability company, is it a force for good? I put a question mark. Or is it a platform for evil? For my own experience negotiating two major corporate governance crises, economic crises actually are part of the consequence of corporate governance crises. There was the deposit-taking crisis of the 1980s, where cooperatives were annihilated by the regulators. But if I'm cynical, I would say that political elites decided to get rid of the alternate banking system, which was not regulated by Bank Negara. And then we have the late 90s crisis, when I was privileged to have in the front line, in the industry itself, whereby we have the triple problems of currency, banking, and also corporate governance crisis. In the wake of this question, as I say, I put a question mark. Is the company, in fact, a force for good? We all know that the veil of incorporation, Solomon case, has given birth to the ramifications undreamt of by the House of Lords then. And for those of us who read granularly, and I urge you to read the Court of Appeal decision, all no pushover law lords, Vaughan Williams and Lindley, right? They are brilliant judges, and yet they were not happy to allow this 9-member company set up by Mr. Solomon, the bootmaker, to actually shield himself with the cloak of limited liability. But when he landed up in the House of Lords, Alistair Hudson, that brilliant law teacher, I wish I have his books when I was young, all right, exposed the fact that despite the lack of precedents, they decided to overrule Vaughan Williams and Lindley because of the pressure, if you would like to speculate, of Victorian explosion of industry throughout the whole world. There was this colonial desire to make sure that there is funds and capital that might be able to be raised without the specter of personal bankruptcy. Closer home, we have our Ong and Keller, our beloved judge who retired recently, Nalini, all right, showed that the Petrodel case in Supreme Court could be applied to our Malaysian jurisdiction. So the judiciary also plays a role. Today, in my discourse, I would like to share my navigating these three worlds: academic, industry, practice, and of course, as a practicing lawyer, the judicial initiatives. It is a vast topic indeed. The lack of corporate governance destroy human lives and families. I remember poignantly one day I was traveling through, after the Second Gulf War, through the barren deserts of Bahrain, and there was an Indian gentleman driving a car. He looks a bit gaunt and not that young, but I can't place his age. Asians are a bit hard to place their age, all right? I say, "Uncle, why are you driving, what are you doing before this?" He said, "I was in the East End, London, doing groceries and selling milk and groceries." I said, "What happened?" BCCI took all his savings and evaporated it. It touched me deeply that if a lack of corporate governance, human lives and savings are devastated. And the old man still have to drive a taxi across the trackless ways of a Bahrain desert, conveying a Malaysian lawyer trying to do due diligence on some Irish company that has also collapsed, and we are trying to rescue the same. Closer home, the Oriental Bank collapse. I remember meeting a manager of the Oriental Bank, and I asked him, he asked to see me. He said that he subscribed to ESOS shares, hoping that when it's listed, he will be rich after working 20, 30 years, not rich, but enough to retire. Unfortunately, the Oriental Bank collapsed, and he got zero for his shares. Not only that, he has borrowed money and had to pay for it. He has to work to pay off his loan. Thank goodness, when I was in industry, I thought I would be rich too, being ESOS. Fortunately, I didn't have to subscribe yet, and when the government decided to take over Filial Group, otherwise I would have to still work on and would not be able to address you. I would have to go out there to make some money. Here we are, the poignancy of anecdotal cases belie the fact that the corporate veil and the corporate entities, with all its complexities, are also a vehicle for the conducting of fraud upon the public, scams that we know of, Ponzi schemes, all right? These issues are perennial. And then we ask ourselves, how do we deal with this in terms of regulatory and in terms of a response from the regulator? And I was involved after the late 90s in the Securities Commission wake, where they promulgated the high-level finance committee report, where the first corporate governance code was framed. And maybe we can have a look at that just for interest, Lee Jun. The first corporate governance code, which I found very interesting, modeled after Adrian Cadbury's code, there was this tension over what a company is for. And I just read that. I was revisiting it after how many years? 1999. Now we are 2026. Oh my goodness, the years have flown. I've flown through the years. What are the aims of those who first direct and manage the company? The single overriding objective, of course, is the preservation and enhancement of shareholders' investment. At the same time, the company must develop relationships relevant to its success. These depend on the nature of the company's business. They include the interests of creditors, employees, and customers. The last sentence, it is a management responsibility to develop policies that address these matters. However, in so doing, they must have regard to the overall objective of preserving shareholders' investment. This old debate between shareholders' interests and what we call the old language, and I still think it's relevant because I'm in the vintage that I'm using the old language, stakeholder view of what the company is for. The report in a salutary insight state, it is worth stressing that while directors are responsible for relationship with stakeholders, they are accountable. The key struggle in this issue in company law, how do we make directors and management decision making accountable? How do we hold them to be legally accountable, which is a normative question. But as to responsibility of engagement with stakeholders, the 1999 report demonstrated even then the tension that comes about between shareholder value and stakeholder interest. Developments after 1999 have evolved apace, and the language of sustainability, we are aware of ESG, all right, have now more or less represent almost a paradigm shift to this whole notion of what is the purpose of the corporation. Nevertheless, to me, internally and juristically and philosophically, if I may use the word, the debate between shareholder value and stakeholder interest still engages. I remember I had the privilege of visiting the INSEAD Institute in Fontainebleau, where the European Eurocentric view of stakeholder was very strong, and they even have a two-tier board where they showed the accountability for workers, environment, and what have you. And there was an interesting contestation even in Europe during that period. The current UK Corporate Governance Code, and I'll just read parts of it, has this statement: corporate governance reporting, the movement towards reporting, what I would call, and codes, are part of soft law, I would say. Yeah? The hard law is when you introduce it in the core company legislation or the capital market regulations. That is the core primary law where you are visited with penalties, whether by compound fines or by potential jail sentences. But the soft law area, it has developed apace. UK statement reflects the development across the board, including in Malaysia. CG reporting should relate to other parts of annual report, complementary information of sustainability report, where shareholders can effectively assess the quality of company's governance arrangement and the board's activity, and where appropriate, cross-referencing such information would be beneficial too in the annual report. My own interest in this also was sparked when I'm a judge for the last 10 years in the capital market, where they have $1 billion ringgit capitalization. I'm a judge still somehow. I want to retire, but they don't want to let me retire, of $1 billion ringgit club. Don't get me wrong, I don't belong to the $1 billion ringgit club, all right? I'm only a poor judge looking at their corporate responsibility, which includes sustainable indices. And there I can see the struggle of companies trying to show that they are in compliance with some of this soft law, and while returning shareholder value. If I'm cynical, and sometimes I go to cynicism, which I hope I don't want to, looking at young people here, all right? Sometimes in the height of the 98 crisis, I saw companies that are in terrible distress and not even paying their employees and paying the shareholder value, giving philanthropic donations to political causes, which is, to my mind, anathema, which is not a sustainability issue. It is a cynical use of corporate funds to bail themselves out, and this can happen regularly in developing jurisdictions, including Malaysia. I don't make myself too pleased with the regulators, but I shall say it doesn't matter to me. So Malaysia too have, while evolving the corporate governance code, have develop, and my remit is also looking at regulatory developments, control mechanisms to achieve these goals, all right, of accountability and behavior, and linking it to the strategic decision-making behavior of directors. And I find this quite fascinating. During my early days when I look at this, I look at Michael Porter's approach where, and in fact I use that when I evaluate the CG goals in the Billion Ringgit Club, that there should be an alignment of what the company does for sustainability and doing good with the goals of the company. The old language of the common law is not that you cannot have cakes and ales, but the cakes and ale must relate to the interest of the company. And the interest of the company, at least in the core company law, is still shareholders' interest, not stakeholder interest. Again, I don't mean to argue that you don't involve the stakeholders, don't get me wrong. I'm just stating the law as it is and not what it ought to be. The evolving corporate governance code, there's a statement, the company addresses sustainability risks and opportunities in an integrated and strategic manner to support its long-term strategy and success. Revisiting this issue in my shelf of books, sometimes I have books which I never read, and some suddenly, serendipitously, it will drop out when I'm looking at this. I realized the literature in this has developed in a very, very rich manner. You have people like Edward Freeman, you have Robert Phillips. When I relook at their literature, I can see that it warms my heart that there's this there's great endeavor, almost quixotic, all right? You know, Don Quixote tilting against the windmills, all right? Of the hyper-capitalist who wants to make money only, and how we should try and integrate decision-making of sustainability, doing good with alignment to shareholders' interests. So again, thanks to my very young generation researchers, because I'm too old to revisit some of this development, in 2026, the SC, Securities Commission Malaysia, outlined proposals to seek feedback about enhancing the CG framework, including the lessons of the earlier codes. And I don't want to bore you with all the details. I have done a paper and I will ask the organizers to circulate to all of you who are interested in it. There are various initiatives, including the Bursa Malaysia, which is our main stock exchange, Sustainability Reporting Guide. You have the National Sustainability Reporting Frameworks. You have the Guide for Assessing Investor Sustainability. I remember my brief sojourn in what they call ethical fund. There was an ethical fund I sat on as an advisor. And I used to joke and say, actually ethical fund is useless. You should have a vice fund. That means you invest on companies that are involved in vice, right? I mean, the companies will sue me. Extractive industry, gaming, alcohol, all right? The shadow industries, they are what makes money. Yeah? The inelastic demands of the business that appeal to the avarice and desires of humankind. And joking about that, the ethical fund is now gone because nobody is interested in investing in ethical funds, all right? And to me, this whole journey of mine, looking at the tension between shareholders' interest and stakeholder, is still a perennial tension that is seeking a solution. You know, I could go on to list and highlight the detailed granularly the regulatory frameworks, but I should be exhausting my 20 minutes soon. I should pause and close up. I think that when I review these matters, I begin to also catch that there's a recent, you can call it a right-wing backlash for lack of political term. The BlackRock of this world and the MAGA America, they don't really believe in all this climate change thing. They call it nonsense, all right? And you know, what do you have? Their pushback shows that they argue that there are performance concerns, all right, of high energy prices, well, now augmented by our great Gulf of Hormuz crisis created by America and Israel, leading to accusations that ESG is but a fad. The greenwashing accusation, which is quite an acute argument, and indeed I can see that in some of the reports of the listed company, how are we to validate they actually did those things? All right. I recollect that Standard & Poor tried to do a product on validating corporate governance. They realized when they highlighted two mortgage organizations in US and the two mortgage organizations, which was priced highly by their metrics, collapsed soon after that, they pulled their product out of the market. For every attempt to create some new issues, there are always consultants that come about, and lawyers are the last in the market to join the team. They make a lot of money out of it. Only academics and lawyers, Johnny come lately, we don't get money out of that, all right? Then you have political and ideological resistance, all right, which we have seen, which is a very, very real. I would even add, although I'm not left-wing, radical left, the radical left post-colonial revisionist historians will say, why is the West telling us we can't do all this extractive industry? For decades, they took trillions from us after the war. Now they come and lecture us that we must do all this. What is going on, all right? I don't share that view. I think that we should go beyond the rhetoric of on the left and the right and to still find a path through this. The fiduciary duty debate, which is still a very real one. In my paper, the earlier thinker I call Elian Stenberg, I think he wrote a very interesting paper arguing that accountability can always be clear, can only be clear if you stay within the traditional fiduciary framework. I want to close with two quotes, a bit dense, pardon me, my little philosophical ruminations. Robert Phillips summarizing Cadbury approach to stakeholder and also adopting what he would call a Rawlsian approach. One of my favorite philosophers is John Rawls' theory of justice. I shall start with Robert Phillips quoting Adrian Cadbury. Starting with the assumption, Cadbury mentioned that capital and labor, management and workers, manufacturer and distributors are to be collaborators in the enterprise of serving the community. It is worthwhile to determine what sort of industrial organization can pursue this effectively. Adrian Cadbury is a very unusual man. Cadbury Code was formed in the wake of Maxwell's scandal. And Cadbury, when technology, and that's another major topic, right, Ridwan? The remit which will go beyond what I want to say, with AI and the techno-fascists, I call them, come and disintimidate all our processes. We have a huge challenge there on corporate governance. But Cadbury did when he tried to lay off workers is to engage in the workers in a process where I would say he practiced Habermasian ethics, where he entered into what Habermas, who just passed away, the great philosopher, on discourse analysis and discourse ethics, where he engages them in a process where they buy into what is happening, and those who stay, and those who are laid off. I can't go into details of that, but Cadbury is a very interesting person. My last quote is from John Rawls. Can I put it up? Lee Jun, you know which one, huh? It's pretty dense, but I just want to close with that. Whenever persons or groups of persons voluntarily accept the benefits of a mutually beneficial scheme of cooperation, the limited liability company, you're accessing a privilege, all right? Requiring sacrifice or contribution on part of the participants. The sacrifice is that we allow you the veil of incorporation and limited liability. There exists the possibility of free riding. Yes, there are a lot of free riders in the limited liability framework. Groups used to hide and shroud tax havens that are anonymous doing black economy, a very real threat to the real economy. For Rawls, the obligations and Robert Phillips' summary of it, the justice for fairness may be extended among such participants in a cooperative scheme in proportion to the benefits accepted. Of course, to unpack this in the real world is not going to be easy. I think that somewhere down navigating between the binary of shareholder value and stakeholder value, the rules and normative rules, should we introduce a core section to hold directors accountable to stakeholders? A debate is a very real one that should begin on this issue. And I don't have the solution at the moment, but thinking about this, I would like to say, as I open up with Iris Murdoch yearning, if we are wise indeed, looking far at the obscure distance, perhaps when we inspect this with closer granular look, we may find a way out of the perplexity of our corporate existence and also our personal choices as we live our lives in early 21st century, of which I don't have that many decades to go or maybe years to go, but many of you will have that, and this is your decision, your choice. Your being here in this room show that you're interested in this issue, and we'll be glad to hear your views. Thank you very much.
Indeed, currency banking